So we're talking about it. Grimcoven, Hopium Springs Eternal. We're going to do a 180 here. Why shouldn't you back Grimcoven, right? And again, I say this to not FOMO, because if you hear all these points and you go, Chris, I am completely okay with that. I have no issue from that standpoint. Or Chris, I'm willing to take that risk that changes in the future. You know what? I always say, go for it then. But let's not kid ourselves. Crowdfunding becoming more of a prototype pre-order. Let's go. And let's just stay with that point for the first point, right? You are buying in right now on the hopes, dreams, and potential of a skeleton prototype. And not unlike several of the other games from Awaken realms, we have seen changes not only from prototype to production, but then even production to post-production. And what I mean by that is Tainted Grail 1.0 to Tainted Grail the second time full around, right? Ether Fields and the second wave of Ether Fields, ISS Vanguard and the second wave of ISS Vanguard. Big changes there. Stalker, the whole Stalker campaign of bringing you potentially not minute details from a gameplay standpoint that are going to be changing post-campaign. And again, how do you want to look at this? Glass half full, glass half empty, right? Because the glass half full people are saying, Chris, their process, Awaken Realms process, right? If you've ever heard sports analogies, right? You got to trust the process to make the team better over drafting and years and whatever. Awaken Realms process is, Chris, their crowdfunding the actual gameplay. What we're talking about is meaningful, significant criticism. And this lies therein with also another problem that gets raised. So even if you have, say, someone that does raise those critically concerning issues that they're not quite satisfied with, how is that responded to? Is that responded to transparency? Is that responded as we saw several years ago with, I believe it was Arcs even, with Leader Games? And when Space Biff put out his critiques and they said, hey, we're going to really revamp this. And then they did. But if you're going to take that, if you're going to want people to do that, you don't just ignore it, right? It's sort of like their issue with AI. It wasn't the issue that you used AI. It was the issue that you weren't upfront about it. The cover-up of the conspiracy is worse than sometimes the conspiracy itself. And that's the issue, right? If you want meaningful criticism, if you want meaningful input from powers that be on the webs, then broadcast that. But again, that goes into then credibility. Are you going to take that into account? Whether that is media, whether that is crowdfunding comments, whether that is tabletop simulator. Because if you give, skeleton prototypes, what is the actual rule book looking like right now? Because that was the issue with Stalker. Almost a year out after the Stalker campaign ended, only then did you get a final rulebook. You are not buying a game right now, folks. You are buying Hopium. You are buying this idea of a boss battler, which as the campaign is sort of, unrolling, unveiling, we're getting a little bit further and further and further and further and further away from the boss battling side of things. We're getting, the minions and then the elites and then the bosses and then the narrative elements and the campaign expansion. And you're going, okay, well, Chris, I went in on this because I wanted a boss battler. I went on this because I wanted a boss battler that was going to be adaptable at all player counts. I wanted a boss battler that wasn't going to be a KDM all night style of one session. And can you say that with any sort of definitive confidence based on what is there right now? Right now. Not when the rulebook comes out, not when or what you're thinking it might be the potential. Chris, they can change it to make it up here what I want. But are they? You don't even know what they want necessarily. That's the problem. Because you don't have enough of a base understanding of where things are at. Because again, small sample size, you're telling me it's going to change because they're going to address the criticisms, and then it's going to somehow also meet your expectations, right? Prototype is supposed to be just that. It's supposed to give you a rough draft or a rough direction of where this game is headed. But if you're also ignoring the fact that this might not be what you want right now, those two things are going to clash. And how do you reconcile that? You're reconciling that by the ever-loving, empty space in your heart, crowdfunding, want to love this, but actuality of it is going to get me burned syndrome. Trademark. If you're telling me the prototype has ideas you're ready to show, that's really good. I like that. But if you also tell me at the same time with the campaign that you have other systems in development, but they're not ready to be shown in a prototype, part of me also goes, why the deuce are you sending this out at this point? Why are you having this campaign? Are you needing funds that much in advance? Are you needing my free loan that much in advance in order to do it? That's where my head goes as a consumer, right? You've heard me rant and say, I don't want to pledge for things a year and a half to 2 years down the line, because realistically, especially with all of the other backlog that Awaken Realms has, that's what you're looking at with this. And like with the other ones I mentioned, Stalker, Tainted Grail, ISS Vanguard, Aetherfields, Nemesis, Nemesis 2, Nemesis 3, right? You would argue that the longer those took, the better they were. Now, unfortunately, most of those were iterations. So when Grimcoven 2.0, when Grimcoven, the Frosthaven sequel-ish vibe, you know what I'm saying there, comes out 2 years after this one is delivered and makes this one obsolete, sort of kind of a little bit like Tainted Grail, how are you going to feel then, right? How are you going to feel with these first editions versus second editions that we've seen? I mean, we see this now ubiquitously across the board on crowdfunding. Early adopters versus late adopters. Some people think they're entitled one way or the other. But this is a clear situation where, is that going to leave a bad taste in your mouth if it occurs? In my mind, you can defend a prototype being a prototype, right? You have thousands of people literally throwing money at this campaign that is not a prototype campaign. It's not like this campaign is a draft, a test run, right? Oh, just kidding, guys. We're going to cancel this campaign at the end of it after we've raised $3, $4, $5 million and just have it go and not be an issue from that standpoint. And we're going to start over with all of the criticisms addressed in a month or two, right? Or 6 months with further development of things. Right now on the game page, you're getting iteration after expansion, after boss, after things that are supposed to give you more variability. And Awaken Realms has never failed to give you your money's worth, right? No one's going to argue that. You can argue the gameplay. You can argue who it's for. You can argue that it's not going to be the same thing at the end of this by the time it changes from what it was at the beginning, right? But the amount of stuff that they give you has never shied away from being massive, right? And therein lies the problem. I can't really think of one Awaken Realms game that I go, wow, the depth of the gameplay came more from the stuff on the table rather than the thickness of the rule book. 37 iterations of Marvel United Heroes, again, I'm speaking for myself here because I'm a hypocrite, are absolutely necessary to get the full experience. Do I need 17 different heroes with slight variations? Do I need bosses with 3 different levels of play times and all of those things? Deep games do not often come from deep rule books. Yes, you will go in the comment section right now as a keyboard warrior telling me all the games that do fill that requirement. But remember, those are also the exception rather than the rule. Because for every game you can probably think of or name that meets that 30 to 50 page rule book that absolutely knocks it out of the park, I can probably name 10 that it does the exact opposite for. Okay, I'm being a little facetious, but you get where I'm going with that, right? You can have escalation, you can have scenarios, you can have those elements without making the overhead this much. And I can't think of a single Awaken Realms game that doesn't have that as part of it. And some of you are going to look at that and go, I'm okay with that, Chris. And I go, you know what? Freaking sweet. But I don't like having to relearn a game every single time I play it with a 30+ page rulebook. And that's partially my fault. Again, not going to blame anyone else for that. It's the hobby as a whole, though, right? Got to churn them out, got to put them out, got to have something new all the time. And so in this hobby that is that heavy emphasis on it, that's a point we also have to talk about as a self-critique. If that's my style of my play group, my dynamic, my collection, is that actually a good fit for me? Do you like learning a game every single time you play it? Relearning it? Do you? I hate it. I'm veering heavily more towards not having those types of things in general as much in my collection, right? Again, hypocrite number one, president-in-chief, talking right here. But that's where it has to be thought of as well. Because I would imagine with all of the modes, with all of the campaign elements, with all of the tech trees and the boss AI systems and the minutia and the terms, if this rulebook comes out any less than 30, 35 pages, I would absolutely, utterly be shocked. I'd love it. I'd love it. I'd love it at the same time, right? I'm saying that as I wish it was like that. But how many of you in the comment section can raise your hand and say, yeah, Chris, I think this rulebook is going to be less than 30 pages with all the stuff, with all the changes, where all of the, overhead and tokens and keywords and mechanics and corruptions and placements that they're showing us, right? How optimistic are you from that aspect? And complete transparency. I went into this hoping this was Cthulhu Death May Die, the boss battler version, right? I'm not looking for sort of a Kingdoms Forlorn boss battling, right? I'm not looking for a game that is going to sort of straddle the fence, if you will. We're going to call it a boss battler, but we're going to do all of these other things too, right? Too many cooks in the kitchen, too many fingers in too many pies. You can't have a game be everything to every single one, right? And that worries me because one of these modes, one of these expansions, some of these characters may just be better. Do you want a character that all of a sudden has shadow powers that's not truly alive, or a mechanical beast golem thing, whatever, is gonna, have a dial that turns every single time they can keep track of, with one of the, weaknesses and strengths changing every single round? Like, that sounds good. That plays absolutely chaotically and a mess to remember. How much of that is going to be beneficial and how much of that is quantity for the sake of quantity? Again, I've never had that issue with them. They give me so much, and so much of it goes unused at the same time, right? Again, and I'm not blaming them necessarily for that. The onus is equally on me as a backer. Why the freaking deuce am I buying 3 expansions for a game that I have trouble getting to the table in the first place? This one strikes the nail on the head with that one too. There's 2 or 3 a month on crowdfunding every single month. And I'm guessing if you're looking at this one, you are looking at some of those. And I'm guessing you have some of those laying around somewhere that haven't been played fully to that extent. Is this going to fill the Grimcoven shaped hole in your heart that you hope? Absolutely not. But you're going to try anyway. Is that the reason you're doing it, though? Is it because you're hoping that it's going to fill that niche right now that is, well, again, in the next month, we have Blood from Ludus Magnus. We have Odalin from Dragori Games. 2 that are going to be similar, that might fill similarly shaped holes. So, right? There's always going to be one that you're going to try and fill that hole with. And so self-reflection time, am I doing it with this game? So let's get into the actual gameplay, though. That's what you're really interested in, right? Like, you're going, Chris, all that stuff that you just said about the logistics and the overhead and the track record, and okay, gameplay, right? You've seen a fraction of what it may offer. You've heard people say that it's potentially way too hard. You've seen that it now incorporates a Kingdom Death and Trespass-like style of grindiness, only instead of having 1 card you can damage, you have 2. So this is not going to eliminate the grindiness, potentially, of that if you aren't interested in those other two in the first place. And the other thing that needs to be said about those other two, you can go get one of those right now. So if you're looking at that as, wow, Chris, that's really, you know what is out there with Aeon Trespass Odyssey, period. Not an unknown. Kingdom Death, not an unknown. This is a big unknown of how actually different, you know, because that's also, let's be frank, what this is being marketed as, right? This is different. Is it? Is it? Really heavy dice chucking, dice throne-esque vibes of the repetitive checks, balances, and mechanics as a whole. Again, don't hold me to that exact quote. I'm going with it in general, that it's not going to be dramatically different in those ways if those were the mechanics that turned you off to the other two in the first place. If you want to pay less for it, yeah, you can probably pay less for the standee version to get a more streamlined version of this as a whole with slightly less campaign. But the crux of the gameplay itself, again, be aware. It's not going to drift you far enough away if that wasn't your ilk in the first place. You're going to be drawing cards from a deck to do your combo system here. So the more you get, the more sense of the grindiness potential is there. If you have a Dice Throne-esque vibe, right? Versus a deck builder where there is some significant winnowing and destroying of your stuff or swapping out your abilities when you improve them, well, then it makes a little bit more sense. But if you've played Dice Throne and you have a deck of this, whatever it may be, right? The more you get, the harder it is to get the good stuff in the first place. Is that going to be a problem with this game, especially in the combination of a dice-driven aspect? The luck element is going to be heavily present. Do you have enough balance between the dice, the mitigation, the running around and getting quests and upgrading, while still just kind of maybe potentially circling the boss, when realistically what you want in a boss battler is to just fight the boss? I mean, that's how I look at that and interpret that. That is probably a wrong interpretation from my standpoint, but that's where my head goes when I hear that as the main driving, overarching theme, mechanistic approach of a game in the first place. Right? It's not grind, minion, semi-minion, elite minion, boss, right? It's boss battler. Well, boss battler. How easy is it going to be to get enough damage to do one of these cards damage? Because that's what you can say about Aeon Trespass Odyssey Kingdom Death, right? It's either you boom it or you don't. Whereas with this, you may be able to do some to it, to the card that's sitting up or the card that's going to go next, right? But you may not. And sort of this half unfulfilled damage sort of thing could be potentially very, very anticlimactic if that's how a lot of iterations of your turn happen, right? Deck builders in general. Let's just, as a side segue there, but also the comparison is apt, right? Is there anything more frustrating when you're playing a deck builder that sort of has the same pseudo situation where that card that you want to buy costs 7 and you only have 5, and then the next turn you only have 6, and then you go, okay, I'm going to try and save it, and then you only get 4, right? And it's sitting there tantalizingly in front of you, and you just can't do it because of things that are out of your control. And could you have the same thing happen with abilities, upgrades, dice-driven luck in this situation as well? The other thing that we haven't talked about yet is just the whole AI thing. Do you care? I see people commenting and shouting from the rooftops about AI horrible, AI horrible. That's everything that comes out with this. And yet, again, people don't vote with their wallet. Grass is greener backing. Because if it was really that off-putting to that many people, you don't get a couple $1 million on crowdfunding, right? We've seen it when people really actually do back with their wallet and you raise a couple tens of $1,000s. So is it really that off-putting to people? No. And if it is it just that big company making things and you're willing to turn the blind eye to it because we're all hypocrites in the first place? Again, no judgment, but say it like it is. Embrace the hypocrisy, if nothing else. I do it all the time, right? The other elephant in the room is this stretch pay system, which on GameFound, more people use this, but I will always make the argument with this. If you can't pay this off, I think this is a bad precedent, and this is a slippery slope. As much as that fallacy isn't true at the same time, I think anecdotally it does affect people that, you know what? If you're doing this like car payments, maybe you should check how much money you're spending in these sorts of things in the first place, because eventually it's going to catch up with you. Eventually, the superfluous influx of disposable income isn't going to match. And maybe not. Maybe you're telling me, Chris, that I just prefer to play it out like that. But ultimately, that's a lot of money, a lot of money, a lot of money to tie up to manage that, especially if you're on a fixed income. It is the bloat side of things. We talk about the component bloat, but we don't talk about the price bloat as much. And I won't argue that it's pricing people out of the hobby, because it's a luxury item in the hobby of luxury items in the first place. Going back to that stretch pay though, are you spending outside of your means? Are you spending, if you're paying it off over monthly incremental debts, more than your budget can allow? Or contradictory, right? You're saying, I don't care, Chris, I have the budgetary to do it, but you're buying for the sake of buying. Where are you at? Do you love this game that much? But again, this is going to be one of the prettiest games right now aesthetically that's maybe going to come out the whole year. But are you buying off of pedigree? Is this game going to actually get played? Most important thing of any of these aspects. Are you buying it to play it? Or are you buying it not to miss out because you're riding the hype gravy train that we see affect a lot of things on crowdfunding? Period. The other point I have to put out here, right? And this is going to be totally out there and not worth it for some people, but it has to be raised, right? If this was not Awaken Realms, if you put this in a box, a blind taste test, and this was from unknown company, first time or nth time producing a game, would you be as attracted to it if it was not an Awaken Realms game? They have earned a lot of goodwill on our hobby side scene things, period. But if this didn't have that name attached to it, would you be as enamored as you are? How much of this enamoring is, again, that hopium that's tied in with Awaken Realms, putting out the next big thing? Their track record, Chris. Their track record, Chris. The Board Game Geek rankings, Chris. The Board Game Geek rankings are end all. It's like when I see people selling games on Facebook and they go, so-and-so rated this game an 8.5 out of 10. You should buy it from me. And you're like, why do I care if somebody else rated this a game this highly if you're selling it, right? Those two things just clash in my head. And I go, I want it to be right for me. And clearly, you got influenced by that because that's why you're using it to sell it to me in the first place. And it failed for you, so why is it also going to not then fail for me potentially, right? That's why I always say, don't listen to what games I like. Listen to why I like them and why I don't like them. Because I don't want to see my name in a comment like that. Liege Games said this was a perfect game. Buy it from me for $10, even though it was $50 that I bought at retail, right? Like that makes me feel really, really bad. I don't want to put people in that position. And I think crowdfunding, and this one included, this is trying to sell to everybody. This is trying to be boom. And I think this is trying to sell it based, and you know what? This is crowdfunding in general, right? Trying to sell you on games you don't need. That's where I'm going with this, is that you need a rule book. You need more of the actual game to know whether or not this is right for you. Because I would dare say, if everybody went in on it for what it was right now, I'm not going to tell you that this game is going to have more sellers on the secondary market for saturation, right? But I'll put it a different way. I'll reframe this argument because otherwise it's going to fall on deaf ears. Think of any Awaken Realms games that I've mentioned so far. Have you had trouble buying any of them on the secondary market, at retail, for any sort of significant markup? Has there really been any issue from that aspect of things? Has there been a significant exclusivity that you have lacked or had to pay significantly scalped prices in order to obtain, apart from getting it early? I can't think of one right now. I can buy Nemesis, no problem. I can buy Nemesis Lockdown, no problem. Buy almost all of them on the secondary market. Aetherfields, ISS Vanguard, Lords of Ragnarok. And then the other thing we have to talk about, right, is all those other Awaken Realms games that I've mentioned, right? You have ISS Vanguard, Aetherfields, Tainted Grail, Nemesis, you know, all of the best of the best. But if you ask people anywhere, social media, you poll them, you query them, whatever it may look like in any of these areas, locations, sites, from people like you and me, people who have played them extensively, not just a one or two off, what is the usual recommendation? Is it, hey, you need the expansions. These expansions are the make it or break it. These expansions are an absolute must necessity. No, it's actually never that. It's almost ubiquitously, unanimously across the board, the base game. The base game. And you know what? If you want to compare it to a Marvel United, maybe the stretch goal is to go along with it with any of those that we just sort of mentioned, right? But then apart from that, right, especially with the Marvel United comparison, do you really need any of the others in terms of content bloat, variability, replayability? No, you don't. You're never going to play enough of it in the first place as it is with just that square of crowdfunding added to your cart pledges already, let alone all of the other stuff that's a temptation to quadruple your price point, facetiously speaking, of course. How many expansions do you want? How many expansions can you have with this? How many expansions can you not play with, essentially, right? That's the question you got to ask yourself. Are you really missing out if you get it later and it turns out to be freaking sweet? Because I want it to be freaking sweet, right? I've been talking about this game for months as, you know, prior to launch being one of my top games anticipated on crowdfunding. And at the same time, I'm going, should I get it? Slightly better price point, question mark. I can pay extra shipping on it. I can get it before anyone knows whether or not it's good, because grass is greener, have to have it sooner, only gonna do it for the clicks, at least for me speaking personally. That's not a good reason, right? Do it only if you look at this game and you go, this is absolutely hitting on all cylinders currently, and I'm even more anticipating how it's going to surpass expectations on what I'm already exceedingly in love with in the future. If it doesn't, if you have any doubt whatsoever, also, like I said with Stalker, late pledge even. Late pledge a year from now when the rulebook is finally out and before they close the pledge manager, because you know what? It'll also be exactly the same freaking price, almost, you know, and what, $5 surcharge? At that point, who cares, right? Inevitably, we all know, as GameFound is surely known for showing us at this point, how much money actually gets raised between the end of the campaign and the end of the pledge manager closing, and it's significant. And it's significant, one, because you have people that are in for a penny, in for a pound, who upgrade and get all the extra stuff, but you also are now seeing a little bit more savvy consumer. So be that savvy consumer that maybe is one of those people, not one of the, I have to have it all during the campaign. So, food for thought, Grimcoven. I'm wrong. Go buy it anyway. I'm an idiot. As always, I am just a crowdfunding peddler, if nothing else. So, that's all I got. I hope it's a great game. I hope it's a fantastic game. We'll see. Have a great day. Stay classy.